7 True Hiking Horror Stories Story. 1. The Man in the Shadows. I want to start by saying this story still gives me chills every time I think about it. It happened back in 2014 when I was hiking a section of the Appalachian Trail that runs through Southern Virginia. I was 26 at the time, hiking solo, something I had done before but never for more than a few days at a time. I had started early that morning, and I remember it being one of those perfect mild spring days, around 70 degrees, just a slight breeze, birds everywhere. I didn't have a set destination for that night. Just planned to find one of the public shelters along the trail before it got dark. Around 6 in the evening, the light started changing, that kind of soft golden light that means sunset is close. I checked my map and saw that there was a small 3-sided wooden shelter a couple miles ahead near a creek. I figured that was perfect. I could make it there by sunset, refill my water, and have a quiet night. When I finally arrived, I saw smoke from a small fire curling up through the trees. The shelter was already occupied by 2 hikers, both guys around my age, maybe late 20s or early 30s. They waved when I approached, friendly enough, and I remember feeling relieved to have some company. It's comforting knowing you're not completely alone that far out in the woods. The 2 introduced themselves. One was named Derek, the other Tom. They'd been hiking together for a few weeks heading north. They had that relaxed, easy energy of people used to trail life. Their gear looked seasoned, their clothes dusty. They invited me to join them by the fire. I set my pack down, pitched my small 1-person tent about 30 feet away, and started boiling some water for dinner. We talked for a while, the usual hiker conversations, gear, routes, weird things we'd seen on the trail. The sun dipped below the tree line, and that orange glow turned to blue and then to black. The forest went quiet except for the sounds of insects and the occasional crackle from the fire. I remember feeling at peace and tired but happy. By around 9, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. Derek and Tom had retreated to their sleeping bags inside the shelter, and I was sitting on a log eating one of those freeze-dried camping meals. Beef stew, I think. I had my headlamp on, pointed at the ground. That's when I got the feeling. You know the feeling I mean, when your body realizes something's wrong before your mind does. The hair on my arm stood up, and I suddenly became aware of how silent the forest was. No wind, no crickets, no sound at all. Just stillness. I lifted my head slightly and looked toward the shelter. My headlamp was dim, and I didn't want to shine it directly at the guys in case they were asleep. But as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something strange. Inside the shelter, in the far corner where the firelight barely reached, I could make out a shape. Someone sitting completely still. At first I thought it was just Derek or Tom sitting up, maybe awake and staring at the fire, but something about the posture seemed off. This person wasn't in a sleeping bag. They were hunched forward, knees up, hands on the ground, staring directly at me. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes. The firelight flickered just enough for me to make out what I was seeing. The man's skin looked black, not like natural skin tone, but covered black. His face, his arms, even his clothes looked smeared with soot or ash. It looked like he had rolled in a fireplace. The only visible color on him were his eyes. White, wide, reflecting the faint light. He wasn't one of the hikers. He hadn't been there before. I had been at that shelter for almost an hour, and there were only 3 of us. I was certain of it. My first instinct was that maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe my eyes were playing with shadows. I turned my headlamp toward the shelter and just a quick flick, and that's when I saw it clearly. There was definitely a man sitting there, covered completely in soot. His skin and hair were pitch black, and he was watching me, not moving, not blinking, just watching. The light from my headlamp hit his eyes for a split second, and they reflected white, like the eyes of an animal at night. That's when I realized he wasn't sitting in the shelter. He was sitting behind it, partially hidden in the shadows, leaning forward to watch us through the open side. I froze. My heart started hammering in my chest. I didn't want to yell and wake the others, but I also didn't want to look away. Every instinct in me screamed that this person was dangerous. Then slowly he tilted his head. Just a slight movement. Still staring. I remember whispering, "Hey!" trying to get Derek's attention without alerting the man. But Derek didn't move. I said his name again, a little louder. Still nothing. Finally, I forced myself to stand up and walk toward the shelter. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight steady. When the light hit the back wall of the shelter, the figure was gone. Just gone. I swept the beam around. Nothing. No sound of footsteps, no movement in the trees. Just the crackling of the dying fire. Derek and Tom stirred awake as I moved closer. I told them what I saw, the man covered in soot crouched behind the shelter. At first they thought I was joking, or maybe that I'd seen an animal. But when they noticed how pale and shaky I was, they realized it wasn't a joke. We all stood there scanning the trees, listening. Every sound felt amplified. The wind, the branches, the leaves crunching under our boots. At one point, we thought we heard movement somewhere up the hill behind the shelter, but it was faint and slow, like someone dragging their feet. We decided not to wait around. We doused the fire completely, packed what little we had unpacked, and started down the trail using our headlamps. It was close to 10 at night by then, and the trail was rough and rocky, but none of us wanted to stay there. For the next hour, we walked without speaking, just the crunch of our boots and the sound of our own breathing. Every now and then I'd look behind us. Once I thought I saw something dark moving in the trees parallel to the trail, but when I stopped and shone my light, there was nothing. We finally reached a wider section of trail that crossed a dirt road. We decided to camp there, not because it felt safe, but because we were too exhausted to keep walking. None of us slept much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured those white eyes in the darkness. The next morning, when the sun was up, we went back to the shelter to grab the few things we'd left behind. Everything looked the same. Our fire pit, the empty food wrappers, except for one thing. There were black smudges on the side of the shelter wall. Long, greasy handprints, like someone had been crouching there watching. We left the area immediately. A few days later, when we reached a ranger station to resupply, we mentioned what happened. The ranger didn't seem surprised. He said hikers sometimes reported a wild man in those woods, a hermit who lived completely off-grid. Some people said he covered himself in soot or dirt to camouflage at night. Some said he was just mentally unstable, wandering from camp to camp, but others claimed they'd seen him standing silently at the edge of their firelight watching. The ranger told us not to worry, that he probably wasn't dangerous, but the way he said it didn't make me feel any better. Even now, over 10 years later, I still think about that night. I've been back on the Appalachian Trail since then, but I never went through that section again. Every time I see the glow of a campfire or sit in the woods as darkness falls, I can't help but scan the tree line, half expecting to see those white eyes staring back at me from the shadows. Because whoever, or whatever, that man was, he wasn't just passing through. He was watching, and I can't shake the feeling that he'd been doing it for a long time. Story 2. The Name in the Snow. This story happened to me and a friend in early 2017 during what was supposed to be a short winter camping trip in the mountains of Colorado. We were both pretty experienced hikers, nothing extreme, just the kind of people who loved weekend trips, quiet trails, and nights under the stars. My friend's name was Tyler. He was one of those people who was always calm, always joking, and never seemed to get scared by anything. He was the one who suggested we do a quick overnight on a peak not far from Estes Park. It was about a 5-hour hike up. Nothing too crazy, and we planned to camp near the top, watch the sunrise, and come down the next day. We checked the forecast, cold but clear. Fresh snow from 2 days before, maybe 6 inches deep in places. It was perfect weather for a winter hike. We parked our car at the small trailhead around noon, signed into the hiker's register like everyone does, and started up. The air was crisp, the snow soft, and for hours it was peaceful, just the two of us, surrounded by the silence of the mountains. By the time we reached the top ridge, it was close to sunset. The view was unbelievable, the world below covered in white, the peaks glowing orange from the low sun. We found a flat area just below the tree line, sheltered from the wind, and set up camp. We built a small fire, cooked freeze-dried food, and sat there talking until the stars came out. That night was one of the calmest I've ever experienced. The firelight flickered off the snow, and for hours nothing moved except the slow drifting of smoke and the occasional whisper of wind. Around midnight, the fire burned low, and we crawled into our tents to sleep. I woke up once during the night because I heard what I thought was crunching snow, but when I unzipped the tent flap and looked out, it was just dark trees and silence. I figured it was a branch falling or maybe a deer. I zipped back up and went back to sleep. The next morning, we packed up, ate a quick breakfast, and started heading down. The air felt colder, but the sky was still clear. We were in good spirits, laughing and talking as we made our way down the switchbacks. About an hour into the descent, Tyler stopped walking. He was ahead of me on the trail and suddenly froze in place. I remember asking, "What's up?" But he didn't answer right away. He just pointed at the ground. About 10 feet off the trail, written perfectly in the snow, were words. But not random words. It was my full name, first, middle, and last. Spelled correctly. I just stared at it. For a second, I thought Tyler was messing with me, but the look on his face said otherwise. He was pale and wide-eyed, just as confused as I was. The letters were about a foot tall, carved or traced cleanly into the snow, and they looked fresh, crisp edges, no melt or distortion. The weirdest part was that snow had been falling lightly throughout the night, so anything written before sunrise would have been covered by now. Someone had written my full name sometime between midnight and early morning. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe another hiker had come through. But we hadn't seen or heard anyone, not a single person since we left the car the day before. Then I asked the question that made my stomach twist. "Tyler, how would anyone even know my full name out here?" He just shook his head. He didn't have an answer. We stood there for a while staring at it, the wind starting to pick up. I remember the sound of it moving through the trees. It almost drowned out everything else. That's when I noticed something else strange. There were no footprints leading up to or away from the writing. Just the words perfectly carved into the snow, surrounded by untouched powder. We took a few steps back, trying to figure out if maybe the snow had drifted over the footprints. But the surface was even, undisturbed. Whoever had written it somehow hadn't left tracks. That's when I started to feel truly uneasy. The forest that had felt so calm earlier now felt wrong, like it was watching us. We didn't waste time after that. We decided to keep moving and get back to the car as fast as possible. The mood was completely different now. No talking, no joking, just the sound of our boots crunching in the snow. For the next few miles, I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder. Every sound, every shifting tree branch or gust of wind made me jump. When we finally reached the parking area, both of us felt a little relieved to see the car still there. But before we left, I decided to check something. At the trailhead, there was a small wooden box with a sign-in logbook for hikers. You write your name, date and route when you start, and you're supposed to sign out when you finish. It's a safety thing. I flipped to the page where we'd written our names the day before. My stomach dropped. My name, my full name, so was completely scratched out. Not erased, not crossed out once, but violently scribbled over, like someone had taken a pencil or pen and pressed hard again and again until the paper tore. Tyler's name, just below mine, was untouched. There hadn't been any other entries after ours. Nobody had signed in after we did. That meant whoever wrote my name in the snow was the same person who destroyed my name in that logbook. and they had done it while we were up there. Tyler didn't even want to talk about it. He just told me to get in the car. We drove down the mountain in silence, both of us glancing in the mirrors every few minutes like we expected to see someone following us. We stopped at a ranger station a few miles out and told a ranger what happened. He looked skeptical at first, said maybe it was a prank or that someone had seen our names in the register and decided to mess with us. But when we told him that the snow had been falling and there were no footprints around the writing, his expression changed slightly. He didn't say much after that. Just that it was probably nothing to worry about, and that he'd take a look at the logbook later. But as we were leaving, he asked me a question that stuck with me. He said, "Are you sure nobody else knew you were coming here this weekend?" I told him no. I hadn't even told my family which trail we were taking, only that I'd be gone one night. That made him pause. He didn't say anything else. The drive home was quiet. Tyler and I didn't talk much. When he dropped me off, we just kind of nodded to each other and said we'd talk later, but we never really did. A few days after that trip, he told me he didn't want to go winter hiking anymore. Said something about bad energy in those mountains. I went back to hiking the next spring, but I've never gone back to that particular trail. I still think about that morning, though. The precision of those letters. The fact that whoever did it knew my full name. The way my name was scratched out like someone wanted to erase me. There's something deeply personal about it. Like whoever it was didn't just want to scare me. They wanted me to know they knew who I was. Every time I see snow now, especially untouched snow, I get this weird uneasy feeling. Like at any moment, I could see my name written there again. I don't know what would have happened if we'd stayed one more night. And honestly, I don't ever want to find out. Story 3. The Burned Campsite Mystery. This story happened to a group of 4 friends who went canoeing in the Boundary Waters of Minnesota. It is one of the strangest things I have ever heard from people I know. The Boundary Waters are beautiful and quiet. The lakes go on forever. The forests are thick and green. It is one of the few places in the country where you can paddle for days and never see another person. These 4 friends had planned their trip for months. They wanted to disconnect from everything. They brought enough food for a week and a map with several marked islands where they could camp. Everything went well for the first few days. They woke up early every morning. They packed their gear into the canoe. They paddled until they found a new spot. They fished. They cooked. They laughed. It was peaceful. On the 5th day, they spotted an island that looked untouched. It was small but had a flat clearing near the shore. It looked perfect for camping. They pulled their canoe up on the rocks and walked into the trees. That is when they noticed something strange. The first thing they saw was a tent. It was brand new. No dirt, nowhere, no signs of use. But it was not set up. It was lying half collapsed with one pole sticking up through the fabric. The sleeping bag inside it was also clean and unused. A few steps away was a backpack. It was open and full of new camping gear, food packets still sealed, a new headlamp still in the package, a folded rain jacket. It looked like someone had just bought all of it from a store and dropped it here. They started to feel uneasy. It did not make sense. Why would anyone leave brand new supplies behind like that? They walked farther into the clearing and saw the fire pit. It was black and cold. Around it were small sticks stuck into the ground in circles. Each stick was burned at the end. Every single one had a black charred tip. It looked like some kind of strange pattern. Not random. Not like someone had just used them to poke the fire. They were arranged carefully. One of the friends said it looked like a ritual site. The others told him to stop saying that. They were trying not to freak each other out. They moved closer to the fire pit. Inside the ashes were things that should never have been in a fire. There was a toothbrush burned almost down to the handle. There were half-melted glasses, pieces of a wallet, bits of paper that had been turned to black flakes, and pieces of clothing. All of it had been burned in the same place. They started to feel sick. It looked like someone had destroyed everything that belonged to them, like they had erased their own identity. One of the friends pointed toward a large boulder near the edge of the camp. Between two rocks was something pale. At first they thought it was driftwood. When they got closer, they realized it was bone. It was a moose bone, large and heavy and bleached white by the sun, but it had been placed there on purpose. Around it were more burned sticks arranged in a perfect circle. At that point, they all felt the same thing. They needed to leave. They backed away slowly. Nobody spoke. They picked up their paddles and pushed the canoe back into the water. As they drifted away from the island, one of them looked back. In the fading light, he swore he saw a figure standing near the boulder, a dark shape between the trees. He did not tell the others right away. They paddled until they could not see the island anymore. They did not stop until the sun went down. That night they camped on a different island, but no one slept. Every sound made them jump. Every snap of a twig made their hearts race. The next morning they packed up early and headed back to the mainland. When they reached the ranger station, they decided to report what they saw. The ranger listened quietly. He wrote a few notes. Then he told them something that made their skin crawl. He said that a few years earlier there had been a missing camper in that same area, a man who had gone out alone and never returned. His gear had never been found. The ranger said they had searched every island around that lake. Every island except one that was hard to reach by canoe because of strong currents. He asked them to point out the island on the map. When they did, the ranger went quiet. He folded the map and said he would send a team to check it. The friends left and never heard any follow-up. They never found out if the ranger actually went there or not. They did not go back to that area again. A year later, one of the friends got curious and looked up old reports online. He found a short news piece from 2011 about a missing man in the Boundary Waters. The article mentioned that only one piece of evidence had ever been found from him: a burned camping stove discovered on a remote island. When he read that, he knew it was the same place. The same island. The strange thing is that the article said the search was called off after the discovery because the area was considered unsafe. It did not explain why. To this day, none of them can explain what they saw there. Maybe it was just some disturbed person. Maybe it was a ritual. Maybe it was something worse. All they know is that someone had been there. Someone who burned their belongings and arranged bones like symbols. Someone who might still be out there among those thousands of silent lakes waiting for the next boat to pull up on shore. Story 4. The Ghost in the Woods. This happened in the summer of 2015. It took place in a quiet rural area of northern Pennsylvania. A group of 4 friends had been staying in an old cabin that belonged to one of their families. The cabin sat at the edge of a large stretch of woods that went on for miles. It was the kind of place where nights were silent and dark. The nearest town was 15 minutes away. The road to the cabin turned to dirt after a few miles, and there were no streetlights. Once the sun went down, you could barely see your own hand in front of your face outside. The group had been there for 3 days. They spent the days hiking, fishing, and sitting by the lake. At night, they played cards and told stories. It was peaceful until the 4th night. That night started out normal. The air was warm. The frogs were croaking near the lake. One of the guys named Kevin went inside the cabin with another friend named Alex to grab food and water. The other 3 stayed outside by the fire pit. Their names were Sam, Jacob, and Emily. They decided to take a short walk along the trail behind the cabin while the 2 inside got the food. They followed the narrow path that wound between the trees. The firelight behind them faded fast. Soon they were surrounded by darkness. The trail was faintly visible because of the moonlight above the branches. They walked slowly and talked quietly. The sound of their footsteps in the leaves was the only noise. Then they noticed something strange. There was a 4th set of steps behind them. At first, Sam thought it was Kevin. He turned around and saw a figure moving just behind them. It was the height and shape of a man. The outline looked like Kevin. Same build, same posture. The figure stayed a few feet away, walking in step with them. Sam called out. He said, "Kevin, are you back already?" The figure did not answer. It kept walking beside them. No sound, no light, just a dark outline in the trees. Emily laughed nervously. She said maybe he is trying to scare us, but the longer they watched, the more wrong it felt. The figure never spoke. It did not carry a flashlight. It made no sound at all. Jacob shined his phone light toward it. The light barely reached through the trees, but he saw enough. The figure had no detail, no color, just the faint shape of a person. The light seemed to pass through it. Before they could say anything, the figure suddenly began to run. It bolted deeper into the woods. The sound of leaves and twigs cracking filled the air. They all thought Kevin was playing a game, so they ran after it. They were laughing, at first yelling for him to stop. But the laughter died fast. The figure was too fast. It moved deeper into the dark forest without any sound of heavy breathing or movement. Then Sam stopped running. Something in his mind clicked. He shouted for the others to stop. His voice cracked. He yelled, "That is not Kevin." They all froze. The forest went silent again. The air felt heavy. Emily started crying quietly. She said she wanted to go back. They turned around and walked back toward the cabin. Every sound made them jump. The woods that had felt calm a few minutes ago now felt wrong. The air seemed colder. The wind moved through the branches in slow waves like whispers. When they broke through the tree line, they saw the glow from the cabin windows. They rushed inside. Kevin and Alex were sitting on the couch eating chips and watching something on a laptop. They looked up confused when the others burst in. Kevin asked what happened. Sam stared at him. He said, "Kevin, were you outside?" Kevin shook his head. He said he had been inside the whole time. The three of them explained what they saw. Kevin laughed at first. Then he noticed how pale they were. He realized they were not joking. They described the figure that had followed them, the silent shape that ran away into the darkness. Kevin said he had no idea what it could be. There were no other people around. No neighbors. No lights from any nearby house. They locked the doors that night. Nobody went back outside. Around 1 in the morning, Sam woke up to use the bathroom. The cabin was quiet. The only sound was the old refrigerator humming in the kitchen. When he walked past the front window, he stopped. Outside the window stood the same figure. It was just standing there in the yard, not moving, facing the cabin. The moonlight lit the trees enough for Sam to see its outline. It was the exact same shape, the same height as Kevin. Its head tilted slightly to the side like it was trying to see through the glass. Sam whispered, "Kevin." No response. He backed away slowly and went to wake the others. When they came to the window, the figure was gone. Kevin grabbed a flashlight and opened the door. He stepped outside while the others stayed behind him. The light swept across the yard and trees. Nothing was there, but in the snow near the edge of the yard were footprints. The prints went from the woods to the window, then stopped. No prints leading away, just a single trail that ended below the glass. They did not sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, they packed up and left. Kevin's parents did not question why they were leaving early. They looked tired and frightened. A few weeks later, Kevin went back with his father to check the cabin. The snow had melted. The yard looked normal, but something strange had happened inside. The front window had a faint handprint on it. It was large and cloudy, like it had been made with condensation from a warm hand on cold glass. It was on the inside of the window. Kevin called Sam and told him what he found. Sam said he did not want to hear about it. None of them ever went back to that cabin again. Years passed. They all grew older and drifted apart, but sometimes they still text each other on that date each summer. None of them like to talk about it, but they always remember the same detail. The figure never made a sound. It never showed its face. It only moved when they chased it. And when Sam yelled that it was not Kevin, they all felt the same cold wave of fear. They realized in that moment that something had been walking beside them in the dark. Something that looked human but was not. They never found out what it wanted. Kevin once said he thought it was a mimic, not a ghost, but something that could copy the shape of a person, something that followed them out of curiosity. Sam said he believed it was the spirit of a hiker who got lost in those woods years ago. He said he read online that there had been a disappearance near that area in the 90s. Emily refuses to talk about it at all. She says when she closes her eyes, she can still see that outline running ahead of them. There is one last thing Kevin told me when he shared the story. He said that 2 summers after it happened, he drove past that area again on his way to a camping site farther north. It was late evening. He slowed down near the old road that led to the cabin. The trees looked thicker now. The road was covered in weeds. As he passed, he saw movement in the tree line. He looked closer. A figure stood at the edge of the woods. Same height, same posture. Staring toward the road, he kept driving. He never went back. To this day, he believes that whatever they saw that night was still out there waiting, silent and curious, watching. And if you ever find yourself walking through the woods at dusk and you feel someone keeping pace beside you and you hear nothing at all, no breath, no voice, no crunch of footsteps, you should stop, look to your side, and remember, it might look like your friend, but it is not. Story 5. The Wallets at the Base of the Cliff. This story comes from a park ranger who worked in the Pacific Northwest. He told it quietly over coffee one night after everyone else had gone to bed. He said it was the only time in his 20 years on the job that he felt real fear in the woods. The cliffs he patrolled were high and steep. They dropped hundreds of feet into a thick forest that looked endless from above. The area was known for hikers and climbers. It was also known for accidents. People slipped, some fell. Most times there were signs of what happened. Broken branches, torn rope, something left behind. But not this time. It began in late August. The ranger's name was Tom. He got a report from 2 hikers who said they heard strange noises near one of the lookout points at night. They thought someone might be calling for help, but when they called back, no one answered. Tom decided to hike out the next morning to check the area. The trail was quiet. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. When he reached the lookout, he saw nothing unusual. No broken rail, no sign of a fall. He was about to head back when something below caught his eye. At the base of the cliff near a pile of rocks, he saw something reflecting light. It looked like pieces of metal or glass. He noted the spot on his map and started down a side path that led into the valley below. It took almost an hour to reach the bottom. When he got there, the first thing he noticed was silence. No birds, no wind, no sound of water, just still air. He walked toward the spot he had marked. Between 2 large rocks, he found 3 wallets. They were lined up in a perfect row, each one open, each one empty. He picked them up. They were dry and clean, not torn or damaged. Each looked new, like someone had placed them there recently. He turned them over and looked for names. Each had an ID card inside, but the photos were gone. The plastic where the photo should be was scratched white as if someone had scraped it with a knife. The rest of the cards were intact. There were credit cards, store membership cards, receipts, but no photos. The names were all different. 3 people from 3 different states. He wrote down the names and left the wallets where he found them. On his way back, he kept feeling that someone was behind him. Every time he stopped, the feeling would stop. When he reached the top, he radioed the station and gave the names to his supervisor. She said she would check the system. An hour later, she called back. Her voice sounded strange. She said 2 of the names matched open missing persons cases. Both were people who had vanished in the same region over the past 5 years. One was from Oregon, one from Idaho. The third name did not show up anywhere. Tom said he would go back and collect the wallets so they could turn them over to investigators. He hiked back down the next morning. When he reached the base of the cliff again, he stopped. The wallets were gone. In their place was something else. 3 small piles of stones, each pile the same height and shape, each with a single coin pressed into the top. He searched the ground for footprints. There were none. The dirt was smooth and undisturbed. He radioed his supervisor again. She told him to take photos and come back. But as he lifted his camera, something caught his eye in the trees. A man was standing there watching him. He was thin and still. His clothes were gray or maybe just covered in dust. His face was pale like paper. His arms hung loosely at his sides. Tom called out. He asked if the man was lost. The man did not answer. He just turned slowly and walked deeper into the forest. Tom hesitated, then followed. He pushed through the brush, but the man moved fast. Each time Tom thought he had caught up, the man would appear farther away between the trees. Finally, the figure stopped at the edge of a stream. When Tom reached the spot, the man was gone. There were no footprints on the wet soil. No broken branches, nothing. Tom returned to the cliff. The air felt colder now. The piles of stones were still there. He took photos and left. Back at the station, he printed the photos. The piles looked smaller in the pictures than they had in person. The coins were still visible, though. One of the coins had a hole through the center like it had been nailed to something before. The investigators came a few days later. They searched the area and found nothing else. No sign of a camp, no remains, no equipment, nothing. They took the photos and Tom's statement. Weeks passed with no update. Then one night Tom was alone in the station. The radio crackled and he heard static followed by faint words. It sounded like a voice calling his name. He answered, but there was no reply. The voice had come from the channel used for field units, but all other rangers were off duty. He turned the radio off. The next morning he hiked back to the lookout one last time. The forest looked normal again. Birds were chirping. The sun was bright. When he reached the edge of the cliff, he froze. There was something new at the bottom. 4 wallets lined up perfectly. He checked his pocket out of instinct and realized his own wallet was missing. He climbed down the trail fast. When he reached the bottom, he saw that one of the 4 wallets was his. It was open and empty. His ID photo had been scraped away. He looked around, but no one was there. Only the quiet sound of wind moving through the trees. He picked up his wallet and backed away. He never told his supervisor that part. He said he felt like if he said it out loud, it would make it worse. He transferred to a different park that same year. Sometimes he dreams of that place. He dreams of standing at the top of the cliff looking down and seeing rows of wallets stretching across the rocks like graves. He said he believed the forest wanted to keep things. Not people, maybe just the proof that they had ever been there. He said the strangest part was that the IDs all looked real. The names, the numbers, the details, but the missing photos made it feel like the forest had taken their faces. When he told me this, his hands shook a little. He said that after he left the job, he checked the names again out of curiosity. All 3 of those missing people were officially declared dead. But each case file mentioned one odd detail. When the families cleaned out their homes, they found that the person's wallet was missing. He said maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe someone had stolen them. Maybe someone was trying to make a message, or maybe the cliffs had a way of collecting what the forest wanted. He told me if I ever visit that park not to go near the base of the cliffs. He said the silence there feels wrong. He said it listens. And if you ever drop something important on the trail, your keys, your phone, your wallet, you should leave it where it falls, because if you go back to look for it, you might find it lined up neatly beside the others, waiting for the next name to join them. Story 6, The Potato. Man, this story happened to a trail maintenance crew working deep in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington State. They were a small group of 6 volunteers spending the summer clearing paths and rebuilding wooden bridges for hikers. Most of them were college students who had signed up for the experience and a bit of adventure. The forest there is thick and heavy with moss. Trees grow so close together that the light feels green even at midday. It rains often and fog drifts through the trees like smoke. The crew was used to strange sounds in the distance. Elk, coyotes, sometimes voices that carried across canyons. They thought they had seen it all until the day they found the blue tarp. It was evening. The sun was fading and the light had that dull orange glow before nightfall. They were walking back from a long day of clearing brush when one of them saw something bright through the trees. It was a flash of blue among all the green and brown. They left the trail and walked toward it. The ground was soft and the air smelled of pine needles. When they reached the clearing, they saw that the blue thing was a tarp. It had been stretched between two trees and tied down neatly. Beneath the tarp, there was a sleeping bag and some supplies. Everything was clean and organized. Whoever was living there cared about order. Next to the sleeping bag sat a small wooden crate. Inside the crate was a thermos, a can of soup, and a potato that had been peeled but not yet cooked. The soup was still warm. Steam rose from the top when one of them opened it. That was when they all realized they had just missed whoever lived here. They looked around the trees but saw no one. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. One of them said they should leave. It was not right to walk into someone's camp uninvited. So they backed away slowly and crossed the small stream they had stepped over on the way in. They made their way back to their own site as the light faded. That night they sat around their fire eating canned chili and laughing about what they had seen. They called the unknown camper the Potato Man as a joke. They said maybe he was a hermit who only ate soup and potatoes. It made them laugh, but the forest around them stayed dark and silent. When they went to bed, the trees creaked softly. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. The night passed without rain. At sunrise, one of the crew named Daniel stepped out of his tent and froze. Right outside his tent, Flaps had a single russet potato. It was clean and brown and still cool from the night air. He called for the others. They came out one by one and stared at the potato. No one admitted to putting it there. No footprints surrounded it. The dirt around it was untouched. They laughed at first, but there was a nervous edge in the sound. They joked that the Potato Man had left them a gift. Still, they could not shake the feeling that someone had stood there in the dark watching them sleep. That day they worked faster than usual. Everyone kept glancing into the woods. Every few minutes someone would stop and listen. They thought they heard footsteps or branches snapping, but when they looked, nothing was there. By sunset, they decided to hike back to the nearest ranger station the next morning. The area felt wrong now. Heavy. That night, Daniel woke to the sound of something tapping against the side of his tent. It was slow and steady. Tap, tap, tap. He whispered for his friend, but got no answer. The tapping stopped. He unzipped the tent and looked out. The campfire had burned down to embers. The forest was pitch black. At the edge of the dying firelight, he saw a figure standing between the trees. The figure was tall and thin. It was wearing what looked like a hood or a scarf over its head. In one hand, it held something round. Daniel blinked and the figure was gone. The next morning, he told the others what he had seen. None of them laughed. They packed up quickly and started down the trail toward town. By noon, they reached a small diner at the edge of the forest. They sat inside and ordered coffee and pancakes. The waitress there was an older woman who had lived in the area her whole life. The crew leader told her what had happened and made a joke about the Potato Man leaving gifts for campers. The waitress went still. She stopped pouring coffee and looked at him with wide eyes. Then she quietly told them not to joke about that name. She said over the last 15 years, more than a dozen hikers had disappeared in that forest. Young, old, experienced, beginners. It did not matter. They were there one night and gone the next. She said that in every single case, the only thing found at their camps was a single russet potato. No blood. No sign of struggle. Just the potato. Always clean. Always placed carefully near the missing person's tent. The local sheriff had no leads. Search dogs picked up no scent. Rangers found no tracks. The cases were open but cold. Locals had started calling the unseen figure the Potato Man. The waitress told them they were lucky to be alive. Most people who found a potato waiting for them never made it back to town. The crew left the diner in silence. No one spoke during the drive. That night they checked into a small motel near the highway. They tried to laugh it off, but no one really could. When they woke up the next morning, something strange waited outside their door. 6 potatoes lined up neatly on the ground. One for each of them. They left town that day and never went back. Daniel quit the volunteer program. The others finished the season somewhere else. Years later, one of them returned to visit the area on a road trip. The diner was still there, but the waitress was gone. The new owner said she had disappeared 5 years earlier. The police had searched her home. On the kitchen counter, they found a single russet potato. Story 7. The Unknown Rescue. This story comes from 2 forest rangers who worked in the Cascade Mountains of Washington. Their names were Ryan and Luke. They had been partners for 6 years. Both were experienced hikers. Both had seen accidents, fires, lost campers, and search and rescue operations. But nothing they ever saw compared to what happened one night in late October. The call came through around 10 at night. The dispatcher said a man was stranded near a ridge called Eagle Point. He had used his radio to request help, but his signal was weak. He said his leg was hurt and he could not move. The location came through as a set of coordinates halfway up the north side of the ridge. Ryan and Luke checked the weather first. It was cold but clear. The moon was full and bright enough to walk by. They packed basic rescue gear and started out on foot. The trail was rough, but they had hiked it many times before. For the first mile, they spoke normally. They talked about how late it was and how strange it was to get a distress call on a weekday night. The park was nearly empty this time of year. They both said it was likely a hunter or a solo camper who had fallen. As they climbed higher, the air grew thin. The trees became sparse. Rocks littered the path. They checked their GPS often to make sure they were still on the right track. After about 45 minutes, they reached the location. They stopped and looked around. The moonlight gave everything a silver color. There was no tent, no campfire, no footprints, no sound. Ryan called out, asking if anyone could hear them. His voice echoed off the rocks and died. They searched for half an hour. Still nothing. Then from somewhere up the ridge came a noise that made them both freeze. It was a scream. A long human scream full of pain and fear. It came from high above them, the kind of sound that cut straight into your chest. They both looked up but saw only black sky. The scream stopped as suddenly as it began. Then the wind started. It came down the mountain in a single blast strong enough to make the trees bend. It roared past them like a train. They covered their faces and waited. When it passed, the forest went silent again. Ryan turned to Luke and said he thought he heard a helicopter. Luke nodded. He heard it too. The steady chopping of rotor blades. It grew louder and louder. They scanned the sky, but there were no lights. No visible aircraft. Just the sound of a helicopter somewhere above them. It lasted about 30 seconds, then faded into nothing. They called in to the dispatcher. She said there were no active rescue flights that night. The only helicopter assigned to the area was grounded in the city. The 2 men hiked back slowly, unsure what to think. By morning, they were both exhausted. They wrote their report and tried to forget it. The next day, they heard a story on the local news. During a military training exercise, a soldier had fallen from a ridge during a night operation. The man died from his injuries. The location of the accident was exactly where Ryan and Luke had been the night before. They compared times. The report said the soldier fell around the same hour they heard the scream, but the military base was more than 40 miles away. They talked about it privately for weeks. They replayed every detail in their heads. The scream, the wind, the invisible helicopter. None of it made sense. A few months later, Ryan transferred to another district. He told Luke he could not stand working near that ridge anymore. Luke stayed. He said he wanted answers. The following spring, he hiked back to Eagle Point alone. He wanted to see the spot in daylight. The trail looked the same as before. He reached the same coordinates and stood there for a long time. He did not hear anything until he turned to leave. That was when his radio crackled to life. A voice came through the static. It was faint and broken, but he could make out words. The voice said, "Help me." It was the same frequency they had used on the night of the rescue call. He answered, but there was no reply. The signal died. He checked with the ranger station when he got back. No one had called him. No one had used that channel all day. He told his supervisor what happened. The supervisor said he should take a few days off. That night he could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the sound of rotor blades above his bed. A week later, he quit. He said he believed they had heard something they were not supposed to hear, something that had already happened, or something that was happening somewhere else. He said maybe there are moments when time folds over itself. Maybe the scream they heard belonged to the soldier before he died. Maybe the call for help was a voice that never stopped echoing through the mountain. He never went back to Eagle Point, and no one else on the force ever agreed to patrol that ridge after dark again.